Let's start by telling you that the Inspector General of Police, Kayode Egbetokun, has ordered a probe into the stampede at a food distribution event in Abuja and Anambra State. At least 10 persons died and many others were injured during the distribution of food items to vulnerable and elderly individuals at the Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Maitama, Abuja. 3 persons were also confirmed dead and several others were wounded in a philanthropic drive in Okija, Anambra State. The Anambra death toll has since risen to 22. Now, authorities are calling for calm while the injured are being treated following the stampede in Abuja. In the wake of the incidents, IGP Egbetokun said negligence on the part of those distributing items is criminal. At a press conference in Abuja, the spokesman of the Nigerian Police Force, Muyiwa Adejobi, quoted the IGP as mandating all police commissioners in the affected states to probe the incidents. Now, the police have also warned the public against organizing unauthorized events. Earlier, News Central's Igbalaniyi Omoniyi visited the Islamic High School, Bashorun in Ibadan, where no fewer than 35 persons were confirmed to have died during a Christmas funfair organized last week by Naomi Silekunola, the ex-wife of the Ooni of Ife, in partnership with Agidigbo FM. Take a look.
Islamic High School, Bashorun. This is the school where the event was set to happen. But let's start with the flyer here so that we know what exactly we're dealing with. Now, the flyer here just says Children Funfair, and I would like to bring our attention to this entry here, which says is free, and it is for ages 1 to 13, according to the information we got. This is the school, and I'm walking towards the gate right now, and from what I can see inside, the landmass is quite great. They were expecting about 5,000 people for the Funfair event. And with what I can see here, with the kind of land space and the structures in here, it can take quite more than that, or even double that space. Now, this is a citadel of learning, but over the days, in the past 2 days, it has become a place of, I wouldn't say tragedy for so many people, as 35 children have been confirmed dead and even 6 more injured, with so many that are not accounted for at the moment.
Let's now bring in Kenneth Ikenwa, public policy and management expert. Thank you so much for joining us on the news, Dr. Ikenwa.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Now, some have attributed these unfortunate incidents as entirely avoidable and, caused mainly by policy gaps. Do you share this view?
Well, before we go into the nitty-gritty of the subject matter, I would like to commiserate with the families that have lost their very, very cherished children and other family members. I'm in solidarity with those families today, and I decided to put on green rather than put on black. And it begs a lot about the Nigerian question. So coming back to your question and to the issue of policy gaps, there is much more than a pyramid of policy gaps, an oasis of policy gaps that is responsible for issues like this. This is one issue too many. And talking about just one P, which is policy, is not just enough. We must be very holistic in our analysis of the subject matter and look at how we can have a regulatory framework that will cut across the nook and crannies of the entire federation, so that when events like this are intended, for distribution, intended to help in the elevation of living standards of people and living conditions, that regulatory framework would actually be followed. But if you give me the time, I would say that this situation actually speaks to about 3 or 4 major issues, which we must bring to the fore. The first is the poverty rate in Nigeria. If we didn't have a humongous poverty rate in the excess of about 60 to 70%, both multidimensional poverty and abject poverty, we won't be having people rushing to places like this just to get a derrica of rice, a derrica of beans for their living. Second, it speaks to the deepening low level of economic freedom in this country. It means that the freedom with which people are supposed to move from one level or state of standard of living to the other is getting darker and darker. And the economic hardship actually tells us more about why this is the situation. And there is a lack of distributive justice. And that is why we see that rather than bring so many people out of poverty with the kind of resources that we have, we are taking them further and further into poverty. And finally, very pathetically, it is a justification for what ought not to be in Nigeria, which is reversed Pareto optimality. And what does that mean? There's reverse social efficiency. Events like this, for instance, are supposed to come with a lot of marginal social benefits, but we are beginning to see that they are coming with marginal social cost, and the cost elongating itself, extending itself to taking a lot of innocent lives out of Nigeria, out of families, bringing tears into families and into homes, which ought not to be at a season like this. I hope the government will look at this more holistically and do something about it so that we avoid things like this happening in 2025 and afterwards.
And now you talked about, bringing social tears, and a video was actually played while you were speaking, and that was actually from a similar event from last year, and you could actually see children, parents standing with their, last week, I beg your pardon, parents standing with their children on fences and children being thrown over the fence. I don't know if you can actually see that clearly, but that is actually what was obtainable at this particular event. And looking at the number of people that were even gathered so closely together. What is your take on this? And, what does this say about, the desperation for people to want to get, enough to be able to feed their families and even also, have enough for their next meal?
Well, what has been displayed and what I just watched that I was viewing whilst you were speaking, and bringing it down to the point of desperation, just shows that there is a correlation between desperation of people, at least to get a basic meal or 3 basic meals, or at least to feed their families, or to send their children to environments like this to get, palliatives that could last for a week, a day, or 2 or 3, and the deepening poverty levels. But what is more worrisome for me is the fact that this is beginning to become an emerging pop culture in our country, where people organize fanfares and people organize activities without actually going through the necessary guards, the necessary protection, security guards that are needed for such activities, to take place in the first place. So we need to question the authorization process. We need to question the tactics. We need to question the architecture around which most of these activities are actually allowed to even exist in the first place. But much more beyond that, what we have seen is the fact that Nigerians is a testimony, albeit very painful, albeit very dark, very diabolic, is a testimony to the fact that there is a high level of poverty in this country, and people would go anywhere to get a free meal, even without getting a ticket for that free meal. So we must begin to think of how we can reverse these conditions, think of how we can remove this away from our culture, and think of how we can ensure that the commonwealth in this country is distributed fairly, and everybody enjoys distributive justice, and everybody can at least boast of 3 square meals for their families and for themselves going forward.
All right, now, but how difficult is it for the Nigerian system to embrace a rules-based order? Would you say we're dealing with badly written laws, or people who simply won't enforce or even obey these laws?
The first thing I would like to say when it comes to social gatherings and congregations is that it is innate in our culture. As Africans, as Nigerians, it is innate in our culture, especially at seasons like this, away from, the poverty differentiation and integration or calculus that comes into analyzing this issue. It is innate in our culture to want to gather, to want to socialize, and to want to have a meal, enjoy a meal with friends. So when you look at the culture and you look at how the possibilities of coming together and drafting the rules and drafting the regulations, it is easy to draft those rules and draft those. In consulting and in strategy, culture will always eat up strategy for a breakfast. So what we need actually is cultural re-engineering and not just strategic documents and blueprints, and then, you know, the other that comes with investigate this after the harm has been done. We must go down to the nooks and crannies, to the nitty-gritty, to the grassroots, where these cultures are being fermented, are being socialized into people, and begin to reorientate our people with respect to social gatherings and social movements like this. And we must also question the motive behind which some people organize these fanfares. Is it to promote themselves politically? Is it to promote themselves psycho-spiritually or psychoculturally? We must get to the bottom of it. People can't just be dying and dying and dying and nobody begs the question or asks the necessary questions. So we need to come back to culture. We need to have cultural reengineering. We need to have values reengineering so that we can address the issue. When we address it from the social-cultural point of view, it will be easier for people to embrace the new laws, embrace the new framework, embrace the new regulations, and stick to these regulations, because it benefits us in the long run than in the short run, and it reduces these incidences of social tears and social damage to collateral and to families being knit together and broken because of issues or incidences that could have been avoided, just as this one.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Kenneth Ikenwa, for speaking to us this evening.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.